Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Assalamu alaikum students. Hope you're fine and taking good care of yourself. I would suggest you to stay home and avoid junk food. I know staying home can be boring sometimes, but in present circumstances, this is the best option. May Allah Kareem keep us all safe, happy, and healthy. With this prayer, we will start our today's lesson, and our topic today is story writing. I'm sure you must be happy with this topic because I know you love story writing. So in this lesson, we will see what is a story, what are the components of a good story, and how can we write a good story. So let's start our lesson. First of all, we will see what is narrative writing. A narrative is a story containing specific elements that work together to create interest for not only the author but also the reader. This type of writing makes the reader feel as if he or she were part of the story, as if it was being told directly to him or her. Great writers are able to use the elements of the short story with such precision that the writer is caught up in the action of the story. This is a mark of a good story and our goal as a writer. So if we define a short story, we can say it tells about a single event or experience. It is fictional and it has a beginning, middle, and end, and it creates an impression on the reader. Now, if we talk about the purpose of writing stories, we can say that they are usually written for the following purposes: to entertain, to teach, to raise questions. Now, it is important to remember that each short story can have two or all three purposes at the same time. Now, if we say what is a story, in fact, we all are storytellers and stories all around us. After all, what is a TV show or a movie? What is a book? And what do you tell your parents when they ask you, how was your day? Of course, you tell stories. Now, you can write a good story about anything you want. All you need are the basics. You wouldn't bake a cake without knowing the ingredients, right? So before you write, it helps to know the ingredients of a story. The ingredients of a story means the elements, the 8 basic elements of writing a story. And these elements are setting, characterization, plot, conflict, climax, resolution, theme, and point of view. Now we will see these elements in detail. The very first element is setting. Setting is where the story takes place. It may take place in a familiar city or another country, in the character's home, at a school, in a sports stadium, or any place that fits the characters and the plot. Where and when the narrative takes place, it allows the readers to visualize the scenes and the characters in those scenes. Although the setting may be clear for the author, he or she must create a picture for the readers. To make the settings or the places of your story more lively for your reader, don't feed your readers information about the weather, population statistics, or how far it is to the grocery store. Substitute the descriptive details so your reader can experience the location the way your characters do. It can be helpful to make some sort of timeline to help you decide what should happen, when, and where. The second important element of story writing is characterization. Creation of imaginary people who appear to be real to the reader. The writer gives information about the characters in the story. Characters, real or imaginative, should be brought to life through the narrative. If a character is not described well, the story will not be believable. In order to develop a living, breathing, multifaceted character, it is important to know way more about the character than you will ever use in the story. Here is a list of character details that can help you to write a character in your story. For example, name, age, job, ethnicity, appearance, residence, pets, religion, hobbies, single or married, children, and temperament. Here is an example of character writing that may help you to develop a character in your story. When you plan to illustrate a character in your story, start by asking yourself some questions. For example, who is your main character? What does he or she like or dislike? What is your character's personality? What does your character look like? 2 or 4 characters are enough for a short story. Don't use your friends' names in the story. Use your imagination. Use names that people don't use often. Think of funny names if you're writing a humor story. Describe what they look like, who they are, how they move, and maybe how they talk. Show how your characters feel using adverbs and adjectives. For example, tired, angry, excited, happily, sadly, curiously, etc. The third most important element of story writing is plot, a series of events through which the writer reveals what is happening to whom and why. All fictional stories have a plot. Plot is the sequence of events that takes place in the story. There are 5 components to plot. Number 1, central problem or conflict. Number 2, rising action. Number 3, climax. Number 4, falling action. And then finally, resolution. Plot is who, what, where, when, why, and how outline that gives the narrative direction. It tells us what the story is all about. And in plot, the events unfold as they happen. Plot is basically the frame of the narrative. If we talk about the structure of the plot, we can say it has a proper beginning, middle, and ending. If we talk about the beginning, it is basically an enticing opening to capture the reader's interest. It reveals the setting, introduces the main characters, and represents the conflict. In the middle of the story, characters attempt to resolve the conflicts or problems, and secondly, the action progresses sequentially step by step. While the climax is basically the turning point of the narrative, it reveals the process involved for solving the conflicts. Your story should consist at least of an introduction, initiating incident, rising action, climax, falling action, and resolution. You can draw or write a visual with very simple descriptions of what should happen in each of these stages. Having this done will help you to keep focused when writing the story, and you can easily make changes to it so that you are able to keep a steady flow as you write the full story. The next element of story writing is conflict. Conflict is the fundamental element of fiction, fundamental because in literature, only trouble is interesting. Conflict produces tension that makes the story begin. Tension is created by opposition between the character or characters and internal or external forces and conditions. By balancing the opposing forces of the conflict, you keep readers glued to the pages, wondering how the story will end. The possible conflicts include the protagonist against another individual, the protagonist against nature or technology, the protagonist against society, the protagonist against God, or the protagonist against himself or herself. Conflict is the essence of fiction. It creates plot. The conflicts we encounter can usually be identified as one of these 4 kinds that I've just mentioned. Often, more than one kind of conflict is taking place at the same time. In every case, however, the existence of conflict enhances the reader's understanding of a character and creates the suspense and interest that makes you want to continue reading. In short, you can say conflict is a problem in the story that needs to be resolved by the main character or the protagonist of the story. Use the magic of conflict. Conflict means someone or something that tries to stop your hero from solving the problem. The more times your protagonist or the hero of the story tries and fails, the better. To enhance the conflict in your story, ask the following questions to yourself. What is your main character's problem? Is it a big enough problem that it will take a whole story to solve it? And how does your main character try and fail to solve his or her problem? Without a problem, your story would be dull as watching paint dry. But when you give your main character a problem to solve, your story comes alive. So you must add a conflict in your story to make it more interesting for your reader. The next component of story is climax. Climax is when the action comes to its highest point of conflict. This is the turning point of the story, the most exciting or dramatic moment. It is the moment the reader has been waiting for. In Cinderella's case, the payoff is when the slipper fits. After climax comes the resolution of the problem. The resolution means the story's action after the climax until the end of the story. It is basically the conclusion of the story. In short fiction, it is difficult to provide a complete resolution, and you often need to just show that characters are beginning to change in some way or starting to see things differently. The most satisfying resolutions come when you think your hero is about to give up. When they have tried everything else, they finally solve the problem. It's best if your main character solves the problem on his or her own. Look back at your character traits and see if one of your hero's characteristics can help him or her solve the problem. It's even better if one of their faults turns out to be a strength. Then ask yourself these questions. How does your main character finally solve the problem? If possible, can they solve it by using their own strength or wits? Does the story or character ends up back where it started? The next element of story is theme. The story's main ideas, the message the writer intends to communicate by telling the story. A theme is a message revealed in the story. It may be directly stated, like in a fable where the moral is told at the conclusion, or it may be indirect, leaving the reader to decide the story's message. There can be more than one theme for a narrative. The next component of story writing is choose a point of view. The story is told from the view of I. The narrator is either the protagonist or the main character and directly affected by unfolding events, or the narrator is a secondary character telling the story revolving around the protagonist. The second point of view is the story is told directly to you, with the reader as a participant in the action. The third point of view is the story tells what he, she, or it does. The third person narrator's perspective can be limited. Once you're familiar with the components of a story, you must know how to write a good story. And for writing or organizing your story, you can take help from the storyboard. Storyboard includes the opening, setting, characters, problems, solution, and ending of the story. The first thing you need to do is to collect your ideas for your story. After collecting your ideas, write a catchy first paragraph. The first sentence of your narrative should catch your reader's attention with the unusual or unexpected action or a conflict. Begin with tension and immediacy. Remember that short stories need to start close to their end. Write meaningful dialogue. Dialogue is what your characters say to each other or to themselves. Each speaker gets his or her own paragraph, and the paragraph includes whatever you wish to say about what the character is doing or when speaking. The next important thing is figurative language. Figurative language is the use of descriptive words that bring your reader into the story. The use of figurative language means similes, metaphors, personification, hyperbole, alliteration, etc. Now, the use of figurative language, sensory imagery, vivid verbs, strong sentences, dialogue, and point of view. These are the things that make each other unique. Now, every student has his or her own style and technique. Although we have the same topic, but everyone will write differently. When you write a narrative, it is important to explain the sequence of events clearly. These are some of the things you can do. List events in the correct order before you write. Use narrative tenses to highlight the order of events. Include linkers and time expressions for extra clarity. The linkers to show time, for example, when, as soon as, while, as, can be used to show some time expressions. For example, an hour later, that afternoon, the next day, 2 years ago, etc. There are few more things that can make your writing more emphatic. For example, strong verbs. By using strong verbs, we can express movement and help to create a picture in the reader's mind. Well-chosen verbs can give writing power. Here are few examples that can help you how to use verbs in your story. For example, a man kicking a door, a lion stalking prey, a rabbit digging a hole, a gateway car speeding around a corner, or a dog chasing a cat. Create word pictures. We can add details to a sentence to make an image more vivid and lifelike. Here is an example. We can say the same thing in two different ways. Number one, the man had a hairy face. You can say the same thing in a different way. For example, you can say the hair on Mr. Twit's face didn't grow smooth and matted as it does on most hairy-faced men. It grew in spikes that struck out straight like bristles of a nail brush. Another thing that can make your writing impressive is active beginning. In order to capture your reader's attention, the beginning of your story must be interesting and lively enough to make your reader want to keep reading. One way to do this is to begin with an action. Revise each story beginning. Put your main character in the setting and have the character do something relevant to the story. Here is an example. You can start your story with this sentence, "One rainy day I went to the mall." And you can do the same thing in another way, and that is, "I splashed across the parking lot, yanked open the tall glass door, dripping wet, stepped into the mall." So you can imagine very well that this second opening is more impressive. Add phrases to make your writing more interesting. Phrases add information and interest to short, dull sentences. To add an adjectival phrase, you can ask questions like how, when, or where. Here is an example. The plain sentence is, the boy was a culprit. And if you add an adjectival phrase, you can say, the boy with a cheeky grin was a culprit. Another example is adverbial phrase. We skipped. Now, the other way to say the same thing is, we skipped across the playground. Or, we skipped across the playground with great abandon after our win in soccer. After all this elaboration, now it's your turn to write a story. And what's your story? Your task is to write a story about an adventure in space. Let your artistic side go, have fun, and be creative. So, write your story all the way through before you edit it. So, only let your inner editor work on the story after your inner artist has finished. So, good luck for your task. See you in the next lesson. Till then, Allah Hafiz. Thank you.